I thought of it, I really did, but I just think I was unhappy with my job and I was just getting so much of a high from working on this like part-time project that it was just untenable. Like I told you, like, money is important to me, but it's not a top three, probably a top five reason, right? So when I like lose the innate, like inner motivation or desire to be somewhere, that's it. Money won't matter. Like the share price of Upwork went up like 10x from March 2020. I would have just had to stay, probably done 9 to 5, bare minimum, to, after a year to 3 years left with, something like pretty significant. Probably, at least in my family tree, no one had made that amount of money. If I would have just stayed. Literally, that's all I would have to do. Just try not to get fired. Like, forget about promotions. Just try not to get fired. Because, like, share options and all that is, like, baked into legally into your contract, right?
Hey, welcome to Beginner Maps, where we showcase stories of scary career pivots so that you get the courage, path, and role models to carve out a career that you love.
Today we have Shre with us. I came across his work through Lenny Rachitsky's Twitter. Shre is the head of community for Lenny's paid community of 10,000 plus product-minded people. It is one of the most valued paid online communities. But when we got on the introductory call for this podcast, I realized that there is so much more to Shre's story than just managing Lenny's community. He has worked on strategy and product at LinkedIn, product manager at Upwork, and has been a founder. Currently, he's working with Lenny on his community. He's a venture fellow at SUSE, building a bootstrap venture business with Julia Lipton, and working on a couple of other secret initiatives that are super cool with super cool people that I've had the pleasure to know about off record. So as a person in his 20s, it is my pleasure to be talking to you, Shre.
Likewise, thanks for having me on here.
Okay, so when we were talking earlier, you mentioned something really funny, and it was that you have only taken pay cuts throughout your life. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I think I told you that if you're ever negotiating compensation, that I would probably be the worst person because, yeah, only taking pay cuts, like straight out of college, like after I quit LinkedIn to join Upwork, and then obviously when I quit my PM role at Upwork to become a full-time founder, I paid myself nothing for close to a year. So, a couple of big percentage cuts, and then before full on doing 100% pay cut. So yeah, that's my brief journey there.
Okay, so if it's not compensation, then what were you seeking with each of these changes?
I think I probably didn't know it at the time, when I was, or like being able to articulate it at the time. But I think maybe two or three things. I think the number one by far, and it probably will touch upon the other two things, is just like fulfillment, like self-fulfillment. And I think I've come to understand what that means for me, at least like at a work setting. I think it's two things predominantly. I think it's one, who I work with. I am definitely a people person, driven person, whatever makes sense there. I get motivated the most by people. I would rather work for someone that I absolutely respect and love and work on like boring work than work on super interesting stuff and work with an asshole. I've had both. I've been in situations with both, and I realized I am actually happier working on boring stuff, but with someone that I absolutely respect and rate. So I think one is just, being able to work with people. And this is, I think, roughly my criteria when it comes to freelancing. And two, that I believe is like a good, kind human being. It's someone that I can be myself with. It's someone that I can just swear. It's someone that I can say my unfiltered thoughts with instead of like, the kind of mindset when you're in office and you have to hold back your tongue. Those two, those two things. Do I look up to them professionally? Do I respect them? And secondly, do I like them as a human being? So that's one aspect of it when it comes to people. The second aspect of fulfillment comes from like type of work. Is it new? Is it interesting? Is it something that I enjoy doing? These kind of things, I think, really come to it. Type of work, but no mistake. This is firmly number two. And I think the third and last thing, at least that I can think of, the upbringing that my mom and dad had in like Nepal. was like very, very different to like the upbringing I had in like Sydney or Vienna or like Delhi growing up as like a kid. Like very, very different. My grandfather, my dad's side, sold buttons for a living in Nepal. Like I don't know what margins you can think of, right? Like even if you have like 95% margins of selling buttons, it's just gonna be in a place like Kathmandu, Nepal, right? In the whatever 50s, 60s. It's just like the lifestyle that my father had was very different to me. So I think there's a lot of just wanting to make them proud and like make them just do good. So I'd probably say those three things kind of come top of mind when I think what apart from money kind of helps me make decisions beyond money. I think my mom is a very good grounding force because she always forces me to think about like my own happiness and my own health, and that like money wise, that like as long as you can kind of take care of yourself, it's okay. So I think my mom more in this case. I'll pause here because that was probably an earful.
No, that was amazing. I especially want to double click on what you said towards the end, which is that your parents are really supportive of when you want to like get the next lower paying job, which is like what you don't really hear usually.
I wouldn't say so. I think it's a process, right? When I was coming out of college in the UK, I had a few like just finance banking offers that were paying probably at least 20 to 30% more than what I ultimately took, which was LinkedIn. I think that was somewhat okay, just because, the full-time job of the company that they kind of knew. I think that was fine. I think there was probably a part of my dad liking the idea that his son is an investment banker in London. It's like how society views investment banking. There was that kind of like prestige element to it. But, he'd heard of LinkedIn, obviously stable company, part of Microsoft, so they were fine. When I left LinkedIn to Upwork, there were a few question marks because it was like, wow, like life is so good at LinkedIn. They visited me in like the Dublin office, the Silicon Valley office, the San Francisco office, and big tech is like, I'm sure you guys know it. Free food, bicycles to get to campuses, a lot of perks. They're like, wow, if you want to leave this. So there was like a bit more, but again, it was like somewhat of a, with a full-time job, public company, less risk. A lot of the pushback came when I wanted to quit Upwork somewhat in the middle of COVID to do nothing. Like April 2021, I wanted to quit and just like figure out what I wanted to do. And that was like 100% pay cut. The startup idea hadn't formed. That was like, okay, you're giving up a US visa. My dad was explaining, you're making the amount of money 2 years out of college that took me over 30 years to like make. There was a lot of pushback for a few months, and I think they ultimately just came around to it because I think one, I started to like just bring them as part of my planning process of like, this is how I maybe kind of want to use the time. These are the things I want to learn. This is what maybe founding a startup kind of look like, and the kind of like processes I would kind of put in place to make sure it's a good idea. And I think after a while, to be very honest, I just got tired of the arguments. So did I. I mean, my mom told me that, like, because I went back home during COVID, it's like, I wasn't in San Francisco. And my mom told me that, if you were in SF by yourself, you would have probably quit like months ago. The only reason why that it took as long, and I completely agree with this because my mom's very wise, is that, yeah, it's because I was living with them, and they were talking me out of it. And they had logical points, right? Like, financially, if you care about staying in the US legally, it made no fucking sense. Let's be clear about that. It made no fucking sense, right? That's where I got like the most pushback. And I wouldn't say that they were very supportive. But the first month after I quit, I was probably like a lunatic. I think again what I kind of mentioned about insecurities. I think I started like two courses. I think one of them on Maven, the other one by MakerPad. I was freelancing for a Series A startup in a SaaS. I was working with a small team on their own idea. I was definitely working longer my first month after I quit than I was like working full time. Like to the point where I got told by more than one person, like, hey, you should like, this isn't what like quitting should look like. I think after month one, I just dialed it down. I think that also just coincided with me having to do like COVID vaccine shots and being more at peace to travel. I'll pause there, but long-winded way of saying, I think my parents were somewhat okay with the full-time job switching, even if it was like the pay cut, because they trust my judgment. But I think where it was like completely off the cliff really was quitting and giving up my US visa for really like no plan. It was just like, I just want time to figure things out.
Right. And it's so great to hear you talk so candidly about your insecurities. Do you ever compare yourself to your peers, maybe from college, who took that job, like the consulting jobs?
Most of my friends are actually in finance and banking. I think the first few years, so I'm 28, I graduated, I finished school 5 years ago. So maybe like the first 2, 3 years, I would say so, of the five. I think now definitely not. I don't know. I feel like I kind of just like veered off the established path. It's like this path to like climb a mountain that's life. And I think when I quit in April 2021, I just like, I just like, okay, fuck it. I'm crafting my own path. So I think since then, I have for sure stopped comparing myself to them. Because I mean, like, at least like if you think of April 2021 Shre, or even May, June, or even like January of this year, right? Like, what's the point? Like making $0, right? And they're on like partner tracks to consulting, finance, right? They're still in that world, and that as long as they're happy, as long as this is what they enjoy, like who am I to say something or judge something, right? Like my college friends, like I love them. At least the ones that I still keep in touch with. So who am I to say what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing? But at least for me, I think when I quit, I fully realized like I am crafting my own path. I don't know what the summit looks like, or even like the base camp, base camp 2, base camp 3, like whatever that is. And that's okay. So to your question, for the first couple of years, yeah, when I actually had maybe more corporate full-time job, I would say at least for the last year and a half, maybe even in the last 6 months when I was still employed full time by someone else. No, I don't think so. I think it's also just maybe a natural way of just slowly aging or growing up. That you just maybe I just like matured that way. But I really think that quitting just really had like a lot of self realization. A lot of development, personal development, growth.
Hmm. So let's talk about you quitting your full-time job at Upwork. What made it feel like it was the right time for you to quit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there were like, I think one, just financially, I'd paid off any kind of like form of remaining student debt in like December 2020. So it was on my mind. I quit in April 2021. So it was on my mind, for like a couple of months before I actually made the decision that like, wow, like for the first time, I actually don't owe anyone shit. It just felt like a mental block lifted where I was like, like I don't have to necessarily make money. I could technically go be like a yoga teacher in like Bali or like Pokhara, and like not have to worry about it. Like I didn't consider it, but it just I think that it was just like a weight lifted off my shoulders, where I was like, I just don't owe anyone money anymore. It was pretty big, to be honest with you.
Right. The triggering point for you personally was basically going from a negative bank balance to a zero bank balance. Like not zero, but metaphorically. While what a lot of people fall into, maybe like it's a trap that they now don't owe anybody anything, but they're like, maybe if I work for another 1 year, I can have this cushion, and that can support me in case I you know nothing works out. So did that come to your mind? Like, did you have any backups?
It did. I mean, I didn't know anyone shit December 2020, so I had like 4 months of, until I quit in April, 4 months of like SF salary. San Francisco, as both of you know, is probably one of the most expensive cities in the world. So I knew, and comp is generally reflected to, accommodate for that. So I knew that as long as I stayed outside like SF, New York, London, like big expensive cities, that like these 4 months could probably turn into 12 or 16, like if I played it right. Like in Mexico City right now, my rent is 20% what I used to pay in SF. And I spent some time in Nepal, so I just knew that this 4 months of runway like can get me probably a year if I choose the places wise. And I don't, I'm not an idiot with my money. So I think one, generally, thankfully I had that cushion, that like longer cushion. I think secondly, on just like, oh, just stay here, work a bit longer. I thought of it, I really did, but I just think I was unhappy with my job, and I was just getting so much of a high from working on this like part-time project that it was just untenable. Like I told you, like, money is important to me, but it's not a top three probably top 5 reason, right? So when I like lose the innate, like inner motivation or desire to be somewhere, that's it. Money won't matter. Like the share price of Upwork went up like 10x from March 2020. I would have just had to stay, probably done 9 to 5, bare minimum, to, after a year to 3 years left with, something like pretty significant. Like probably, at least in my family tree, no one had made that amount of money. If I would have just stayed. Literally, that's all I would have to do. Just try not to get fired. Like forget about promotion. Just try not to get fired. Cause like, share options and all that is like baked legally into your contract, right? Obviously it also means like the share price stays that way, which looking at today's market is definitely not the case. But at that time, right? Cause like equity is just like real estate, I feel like is something people just think keeps going like up and to the right, right? At that time, that's what it felt like, that I was giving away that much money. Sorry, I lost track of the question.
No, that's okay. The question was having a cushion, and yeah, I think you've answered that.
Yeah, I also just think, and this was kind of hard for me to realize when I was quitting Upwork just very quickly, was that I felt like I was quitting a job, and I think it was like putting so much pressure on myself that like that's it. Like I'm quitting a job, that's it. I'm unemployable. And I kind of just asked myself, I quit when I was 26, 27. It took me a while. I definitely didn't realize it when I had quit, only a few months after that. I was just like, you should have the confidence in yourself that at the age of like 26, 27, that like this will not be your last full-time job. That, like someone somewhere in the world will hire you with your PM experiences at work, with your whatever 2 years at like LinkedIn and corporate strategy and like doing product work, that you are employable. It was just like, that moment of like looking at yourself at the mirror, like, come on, like have some self-confidence in yourself. And it was very interesting because like when I was leaving Upwork, I actually had a job offer that I just got at a company that I really liked. I actually wrote a Substack article about them and a team that I really liked. And I think I really, really wanted that job offer. And when I got it, and it kind of relates back to when I was saying that I don't enjoy or savor the moments when I actually get something that I accomplished, that when I got it, it kind of just made me realize a few things. And I think one of those things was that like I wouldn't be able to spend enough time with my grandparents who were in Nepal if I took this job, because it was going to be a very intense job. And I actually ended up turning it down, but I don't think I would have had that clarity if I wouldn't have got the job offer. So even though when I quit Upwork, I still had the chance to whatever, like stay on XYZ amount of money. It was a pretty big pay rise actually, for the first time in my life, and I actually turned that down. So I probably took, it was probably at least close to 50% pay bump, Yeah, like, again, definitely don't come to me for financial advice.
Pay raise, like, what is that? Like, you have to run away from it.
Yeah, anyways, I'll pause there because I feel like that was a bit of rambling here and there.
No, not at all rambling. It was great. Thank you for diving into that. I want to now talk about what you did a few months into the period of after quitting Upwork, which is you found your co-founder through co-founder dating, and you started building a startup. You even raised money for that. And tell us, what were you building there?
Yeah, so I had met my co-founder through Ondex co-founder matching dating, and I think she had a friend, like a COO of a crypto startup, who wanted to like get together their entire company and some like friends of theirs to do a trip. So we kind of just decided to whatever, like kind of work together. She had already organized most of the trip, to kind of like do this trip and as almost like a learning experience. And I think soon after that, we started basically organizing offsites for other companies. So that's what we kind of were in the early days. Like we were a company that helped you get your team together in a remote first world. I think, a couple of months in, we just, we wanted to build software for what I would define as like complex event organizers, starting off with offsite organizers. So if you are a company like, say, Zoom, which is what we're using right now, you want to bring your entire team together, that's at least a couple of hundred people. Like even if you want to bring your like whatever, like your North American offices together somewhere mutual, right? That's a couple of hundred people. Those are flights, those are COVID related stuff, those are kind of hotels, those are restaurants or meals, and potentially like team activities that you got to do. A lot of vendors can't take on like hundreds of people. It gets hard to even book, like hotel rooms above 15 people or 16 people, even if you use Booking or Airbnb, right? There's only very specific places you can do that, and I wouldn't really call them the most efficient. And what we kind of found was like this pain point. It's no one hires like a full-time offsite organizer, right? It's normally someone who has a full-time day job and they get slapped with this like extra responsibility. So that's who we were kind of like building for.
First of all, this idea sounds amazing. It could not have come at a better time because the entire world was basically shifting to remote, and offsites were like, they even are a growing market. And as you correctly pointed out, nobody hires a full-time offsite manager. So hiring this startup would have been like a very clear solution to this pain point. Can you speak about what made you move on from this?
Yeah, for sure. I think it was like the thing I mentioned right at the beginning when you asked me what beyond money kind of motivates me. Specifically, the first thing that I said, which is fulfillment. I think, hindsight's a beautiful gift, but basically I went on holiday in Greece at the end of July. I probably hadn't taken more than 2 days off since I started the company like 10, 11 months ago. So just like, a week, 10 days of like some talks. And I think I couldn't really like process or understand my emotions. Like I just knew that I was unhappy, but I just couldn't really like we couldn't really put the finger on why. Because like business wise, it was doing relatively well. I liked working with the team. Like I just couldn't put my finger on why. So I just spent a lot of that week, kind of like with some of my close college friends who know me best. Spent a lot of time writing like by myself. And I think I kind of just like realized like, you know what, actually like I don't have the commitment. I realized I don't have the commitment to go the full distance. This is just my 2 cents, and what the heck do I know? But I believe at the founder level, you have to have 100% commitment. Just has to 100% be there at the founder level. Like it can't really be left. Like you can have doubts on whether you can fundraise, whether you can sell, whether you can like, whether I can really do this, right? As in like bring the business to like big heights. But you can't really have commitment to like who you're building for, what you're building for. I just realized that I think the thought of me spending 5 to 10 years building for this persona, like the offsite organizer or the complex event organizer and the problem space, I just started having doubts, and I think when you have doubts, it's already like a red flag. And I think that moment, the light bulb moment came when I was actually chatting with Lenny about it. And we were speaking about this hypothetical scenario where it was like, okay, Shre, what if I gave you a hypothetical guarantee that you could work on this problem for 10 years of your life? 10 years of your life, and you have a guaranteed big successful exit, whatever successful means, whatever dollar number it is, whatever like fame level that is, the big exit. Like you're successful, you're seen in the lights of like whatever, you're seen by society as being successful. All you have to do is just work on this for 10 years. And that's when I realized like actually my answer doesn't change. But then I realized like actually the thing is that like I don't want to spend 10 years of my life like building this. I want to use my time working on something else, something that I'm more passionate about, regardless of whatever like a big exit means. When I kind of had that clarity, I was like, okay, like, when I come back from holiday, I need to talk to my co-founder. I think I woke up for like 3, 4 days wishing that I would like wake up and feel differently. That never happened. I think if anything, I woke up feeling even more certain that like, this was the right thing for me. And I think that conversation was probably the hardest one that I had, not just this year, but in a couple of years, because it just felt like I was giving up on her, like forget about the problem space or the idea or, like a lot of other things. It just really felt like I was giving up on her. And it was like someone that I didn't want to give up on, but I think what helped was just that like zooming out, kind of taking away the emotions of it. You can't really have like a half or 80, 90% committed co-founder, It's not good for my co-founder. It's not good for the business. And it sure as hell is not good for me. My co-founder was very like receptive. We're still on good terms. I think we just had a call yesterday. meant to be half an hour, and I think we at least went over by like an hour, you know. So, you know, thankfully still on good terms, but it was definitely a journey, definitely a process, you know.
Yeah, that must have been like really tough.
It was, but I think it's also just experiences that like shape and define you, you know. And I think, you know, I've been even part of like the SUSE Venture Fellows, where part of it is like jumping on calls with founders who are essentially pitching SUSE for pre-seed seed investments. I think it also just gives me like an added perspective, you know, just around the questions I want to ask about, you know, why this person that you want to like fight against the rest of the world with, you know, like why this problem space out of all the problems, you know, that you could be building on, right? Like why this one, you know, because again, at the pre-seed seed stage, which is what, you know, the startup was in and what SUSE typically invests in, you're looking at least 5 years, right? Like if the company doesn't die, you're looking at least for 5 years where the company should be running. 5 years is a long amount of time, man. It's like I haven't worked anywhere for half that amount of time. Maybe it's just like whatever, like a Gen Z millennial thing, right? Where this concept of like working 20 years somewhere is like out the window. But 5 years is like shit ton amount of time.
Yeah. Let's actually switch gears a little bit and talk about working with Lenny. Tell me, how did that come to happen?
Yeah, so I was like a paid subscriber of Lenny's Slack, so I was part of his Slack, you know, community for paid Lenny members. I think got a lot of value with it. I think I was like pretty engaged. I think his then community lead, Colleen, I chatted with her a bit, and I think she was kind of like ramping off at one point. I think she floated the idea to me, like to kind of like take over, and Lenny kind of like reached out. I think that's like the sequence of events. So it was like luck, but I think also a bit of manufactured luck in the sense of like it was clear that I was like an active member, you know, like on the Slack. It wasn't like, you know, I'm gonna pick one out of 5,000 random people to like interview with for this role. So it's like I would say manufactured luck. I think that's a kind way to myself. That's how it started basically, and that was over a year ago at this point.
That's amazing. And were you confident that just since you are an engaged member of the community, you can do the job of like the head of community?
No, I didn't know what community really meant. I feel like community as a job title is like one of those sexy buzzwords over the past 2 years. I didn't know what the heck it meant. What I knew was that I really, really wanted to work with Lenny. I loved his content, and I think this is someone that, again, like at least the first part of the people equation that I mentioned about fulfillment, someone that I really look up to, right? Is ticked. I just didn't know how he was as a person, as a boss, as a coworker, but at least that first of the two part of the people equation was ticked. So I just knew I wanted to work with him in some capacity, any capacity. And yeah, I think that's really where it all, I would say, started.
Great. And you started with 5 hours per week, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, even now I don't count my hours. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. I think the idea of just capping it like around that was just because I was like running or was about to run my own startup. So it was just a way of like being able to just like keep the bills paid, you know, like pay the bills, be able to work with him, and also just get advice from him time to time, right? So it just kind of made sense. I met some really cool people through like Lenny's community, you know, not just saying this because, you know, I'm head of community, but really I'm in Mexico City, and some of like the friends that I would kind of define as that I hang out with here are through Lenny's community. You know, it has helped me settle into new places for sure.
That's amazing. And can you just give me a brief about what are your responsibilities there? Because since you're like not a full-time community person, it must be like scoped out a little lesser.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you how the responsibilities have changed. I initially got hired just to help Lenny manage the Slack. You know, I think around that time was like 5,000 members, you know, a lot of channels, a lot of different people posting different stuff daily, right? So just like help me stay on top of this. Help me make sure, you know, it's a good place, safe place, productive, it's a relevant place. Because there's, you know, a lot of Slack communities, Slack workspaces. Why should people spend time on this? You know, it was like to help keep that signal to noise ratio like very, very high, like intentional people posting relevant stuff, not like, a bunch of people promoting their own content or their own startups or, like that kind of stuff we wanted to minimize. So the first 3 or 4 months, really my main job was like, just read every single message every day, the few like, messages or actors that go against community guidelines, which we would define as just like spammy promotional material, right? Or hurtful material, which thankfully like basically never happens. Um, just keep that to like a minimum, keep that like eradicate that to basically zero. Um, so it was just me like reading, watching every message, making sure it was a good spot, reaching out to the few folks who were against the community guidelines. I think, for the most part, that's what it kind of was. There was some element of helping out with things like fireside chats. I think we had Brian Bolfer on. I think we had Andy Chen from A16D, just like helping with like some event stuff, but really, at least when I think of it like a year ago, that's kind of what I was doing. I think fast forward to like January this year, at that point, I'd been basically reading every message, at least on the public channel, for 3, 4 months. I was just kind of like, I think we could do like more here. And that was just because I was really reading in some cases like the same things by different members that they kind of wanted XYZ, just different people were posting it. Different people didn't maybe know how to like call it, like what it was. But I started thinking of like, what initiatives can we kind of like spin up, So I think the first centered around like a mentoring program. I think I was just reading like a lot of like I would really love someone a few years like above me to help me out with a bunch of stuff. And I realized like, what, we actually have like a really good mix of more senior folks and more junior folks, So tried to spin up like just a mentoring program that I was like thinking through, got some advice, got some feedback. I think we had around like 15 to 20% of all Slack members sign up to be like a mentor or mentee. I was thinking like, okay, maybe we'll have like 100 people. We ended up having close to 1,000 people sign up. So this was like, it was definitely a week where I was not working 5 hours a week, like definitely not. So that like blew me away, Fast forward to today, like the first iteration of it, I ran, and that's something that will be a consistent theme. Whenever I think of an experiment, I like to run the first version of it, just because it gives me like an acute understanding of what needs to be done, the pain point, and like how we can improve this, Fast forward to today, I think we're on a third version of the mentoring program where we match, mentees and mentors. We have chatted with like First Run Capital, who run like an excellent mentoring program and have for a number of years, to like get their feedback. So we're definitely inspired by them. And, hopefully I think at this point we made like hundreds of matches. There's always things we can do better, for sure. And, as soon as we wanted to run it the second time, when we kind of got good enough feedback, or the feedback that wasn't good, that was negative, but it was things I knew we could improve with a bit more process or structure, I, chatted to Jess about it in the community, and now she runs mentoring. She's mentoring lead, and I think she does an excellent job with it. So mentoring's kind of grown under my like remit. Meetups is another thing. I threw the first one in January in New York this year. It was so cold that day. I didn't know if anyone would show up. I swear I was like minus like 20 or something, and I was like, if I wasn't organizing it, I wouldn't come. I'm just gonna be like one person at this thing and be like a complete loser. Uh, Turns out like 20 people showed up on this like freezing Brooklyn, like January day. And I think we had fun. I think keep in mind, this is January 2022. I think in real life, big events were just like starting to like, come again. So I threw another one in February in SF when I was visiting. And again, like, good crowd, probably again, like similar numbers. And I think at that point, people were like tweeting about it or posting photos about it. I don't really know what happened, but there was just like a bit of like this inflection point where I just had people asking me like, hi, can I organize one in Bangalore? Can I organize one in LA? Can I do one in London? Fast forward to today, we have, I think the most meetups we've ever had this month, like 37. I think on a minimum of like 4 continents every month, probably for like a few months now. you know, Tokyo, Riyadh, Gold Coast in Australia, South Africa, Brazil, like, you know, you name it, right? I do them in Mexico City now. Fast forward, we have over 30 a month, 4 continents. Thankfully, we have sponsors for them so we can like pay for people's drinks and like a bit of snacks, you know, to like a good level. And, you know, it just got too much to manage. So I found Ria, who now heads all things meetups, you know. Um, sorry, it's a long-winded way of saying my responsibility has grown from kind of just managing Slack to a few of these like initiatives that I like to think of it. So mentoring and meetups is one, but masterminds is like another. Ask me anything kind of sessions are probably like another of them. I help out with other things like book clubs, which is run so well by Evan, like from our community. So I just try to like, I guess, sit on top of all these initiatives. If there's like a new one, I will personally take responsibility for it and run it myself. So we're potentially thinking of one or two in the new year. Like at least like starting in January. And then if it goes well, if there's good traction, I'll probably find someone to like run it, you know? So that's kind of how I look at how my role has evolved. Just like managing, making sure that Slack is like high signal to noise to like still doing that. I still take a look at every single message that's posted. I think that's what gives me the inspiration to know what to spin up, you know? Like the mentoring thing, that was just so many different ways across so many different channels that I was just like, there's something in here because this was like, you know, the 20th person who said this in probably like 2 months. Same thing with meetups when someone's just like, oh, does anyone want to grab coffee? I'd love to meet other product people. But because it's so like decentrally kind of organized, sometimes that like, you know, you can't really get it done. Sometimes you just need a little bit of organization. Someone to spin up an event page, to pick a date, to pick a time, and that's like a forcing mechanism. Just a little bit of organization that I've seen with some of these things can kind of go a long way. So that's how I kind of look at my role, how it's evolved. Try to think of initiatives basically that can create value for community members.
Okay, you make it look so easy. Like you just have to look at all the messages on Slack, look at what people are asking again and again, run the first iteration, and then hand it off to the members or to another member of the team. Like, does it come so easily to you?
I mean, I think the community makes it easy, as in it's very highly engaged. That's one. I think two, Lenny's just so supportive. You know, like he's so supportive with like any experiments I want to run. For him, the bar is just like, is this gonna add value to people? You know, you need to understand like when you're on the Slack, which is for paid Substack subscribers, right? There is no upsell. We have nothing to upsell or cross sell, right? Like literally, because you have already paid the Substack subscription fee. You don't just get access to his premium content, but also this Slack, the meetups, the mentoring programs, like all of these things, right? There's nothing to sell. And I think because we have that view and lens, right? There's no ulterior motive. It's just like, how do we make this an intentional place? How do we create value for people? And I think that kind of mindset when it comes to community building is just so critical, you know, because then you really, really are thinking of value for your members without any other ulterior motives. Don't get me wrong. I think you can like monetize and still create value, right? But at least for us, it just comes from like 100% pure place is how I would look at it. So I think Lenny makes it easy for sure. I think third, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm like overstating this, but maybe having like a bit of like a PM background, you know, like being able to, you know, just have like a bit of a lens of like user research and like what are people really trying to say and what problem or pain point are they really getting at? You know, someone like complains or wants something, you know, like I'm not going to try to spit up an initiative just for one person. And that's simply because we have 10,000 members, right? But if it becomes a consistent theme, if I'm like, oh, this is interesting, you know, it will catch my attention. Like for something like Mastermind, for any new initiative, typically I'll spin up like a 1-2 pager of like what we're trying to do, why we should be doing it, and like examples from the community of how they have expressed this desire. So for Masterminds, I took at least 8 screenshots on that like 1-2 pager that I shared with Lenny, like why we should be doing this. Like these are like 8 very different people over different points of time that have been craving this thing. So yeah, I think maybe that PM lens helps like a little bit. I don't know, but I'm probably overstating it. I think the community is just fire. And I think Lenny is just so incredibly supportive. I think those two just really make this job a lot easier.
Love this. Okay, now I want to talk to you about your freelancing career. So your LinkedIn bio says that your current work life is like you're a Dobby for other people. Tell us about that.
I think not a Dobby for other people. I think I am Dobby, and I guess for any of your listeners that don't know what Dobby is or who Dobby is, he's an elf in the Harry Potter series. And Dobby's significance in the series is because elves in the Harry Potter world kind of just enslaved. And Dobby's different because he becomes a free elf. And that's what I mean when I kind of self-describe myself as I'm kind of like going through like a Dobby moment where I'm just kind of I feel free that I work with who I want to work with. So I think that's very empowering, to be honest with you. Job security standpoint, a lot of people that I'm working with, they could probably fire me tomorrow. I could quit tomorrow, right? No whatever severance, no like 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever like pay, like no benefit, in terms of like health insurance and that stuff, right? But I just feel very, very empowered because it's, the people I'm working with today is because I choose to work with them. And I would also like to think that they still choose to work with me. So that's what I kind of mean with like the Dobby component of it, that like I am a free elf.
Okay, and what do you do for the people that you work for? Like, how do you pitch yourself? Like, what's the value that you're bringing?
Yeah. Um, I think now for like the three things that I could publicly disclose, with Lenny, head of community, I think how I pitched myself was very different to what the role is now. I think, I pitched myself then over a year ago. I was like, I just want to work with you. I have that PM experience, which is who you write for and who your audience is. Um, and just genuinely like forming and managing communities as someone who's moved around quite a bit, like in my life, and I've had to start at least in real life communities from scratch. With USA, I think it was just more like, I guess I've had that operator kind of background at LinkedIn and Upwork. I have that founder background, who's raised like I guess like the startups raised a bit of money and kind of gone from -1 or 0 to maybe zero point 0.5 or whatever. So I have like maybe slightly a different background. And I've also just really been interested in this program for 3 years running. It's like the first year I didn't get interviewed. The second year I made it to the final rounds, and this year I finally got in. You just have someone who's hyper motivated, and you can see my applications in the past 2 years. I'm pretty sure I'm the only fellow who's applied for this, like in this current cohort, for 3 years in a row. So I think that motivation, that hunger, really, above all else, just came across very strong, in my opinion. At least if I have to self-assess my own like interview process with them. And I think with Julia and awesome people, probably more of just like that experience of like founding something and running with something with very like ambiguous kind of instructions. We're kind of just like testing an experiment really within within her fund and the talent space, and it's just being able to like autonomously run this because she's obviously like she's a GP of her own fund, right? So she has a day job. She has this idea, she has this experiment, but she doesn't really necessarily have the time to dedicate to like run this, right? So myself, along with two other people, and I kind of like lead this like small tiger team, I'd say, like, just try to actually put in the hours to work to like run this, which she unfortunately can't do because she obviously has like a very demanding day job. So my pitch is like, I've run small teams before. I don't need a lot of instructions because, as a founder, you don't really have instructions. So that's kind of like my pitch. I think for the other undisclosed things right now, which you're aware of, but I can't publicly disclose right now, I think it's more similar to like the Julia mold, right? Like it's more like people who maybe enjoy doing something or their core business is one thing. They have maybe another idea, they have another experiment they want to try out. Like that would be kind of different and take up a lot of time. Um, Not a lot of instructions. They know what they want or where they want to get to, but not necessarily know how to do that or have the time to execute on it. That's where I kind of come in and just be like, cool, if you want, I can hire like a small part-time freelance team. I can autonomously kind of do this, and I'll only really message you or bother you when there's like big kind of decisions, either on the finance side, on the strategy side, right? Where I kind of need your input. So it's kind of just like maybe just trying to like run small businesses from close to nothing to somewhere part of the pitch is like being able to add processes. Like I've done that for a VC fund earlier this year called Rally Cap, just adding automation, adding proper process. So there's like a proper structure to things, so things don't get lost. I feel like particularly with solopreneurs or solo GPs that because it's themselves, they do a process that works for them, and that's fine. But sometimes it can also not be the most efficient way to do it, where things can maybe get lost, where it's all in their head, which is great because I also work like that. And sometimes it helps to have things and document like everything, down. Maybe it's a deal you passed on and you want to like sync up later on. Maybe it's a task or someone you need to follow up on in like 2 weeks, Um, things like this, the process side, which is a small value add, I would say. I don't mind doing it. I think I look at it as like I get paid to learn more about Airtable or Zapier. Um, like that's how I look at it, to be honest. I'm not an Airtable or Zapier expert. Like I know how it like roughly works. I've created Zaps before, created Airtable basins before, but I kind of like getting paid to learn something, especially as valuable as Airtable or Zapier. Mainly is like I can run small businesses relatively autonomously. The second, if necessary, is like I can just add some process or structure to like how you run or want to run something.
Love this. This is so fascinating. In fact, like the entire conversation with you has been so incredibly fascinating. I have so many more follow-up questions, but we are running out of time. So I will ask you just one final question before we move on to the rapid fire round.
Sure.
Okay. So all of these opportunities that you were just talking about, they have never been posted publicly on like public job boards or LinkedIn and stuff. How can someone find out about these incredible opportunities?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at the beginning, I think it's like a mix of two things. And when it's at the beginning, like I didn't really have a network in the sense of like, I didn't know Lenny, I didn't know Julia. I didn't know any of like the undisclosed people that I'm working with who I would say are either like founders who have exited their businesses or have like whatever, like 100K plus followers on their Twitter. I didn't know any of these people. So I think one is just like manufactured luck. And I think I mentioned that on the topic of Lenny, right? Like if you are in like communities you want to be interested in or part of, right? If you could be an active member there and just see who's on there and that kind of stuff, I think there's an element where you create your own luck. It's obviously not guaranteed, right? But you'd be surprised who's on Lenny's Slack, for example. You'd be surprised which founders, which VCs are on there. There's some very let's call them interesting people there who have raised several rounds or partners at XYZ funds. And I'm sure Lenny's not the only Slack community where that exists, right? So there's an element of like you can manufacture your own luck too, just by being present, by being active, by actually adding value. It won't happen right away, but I think over time, I think if you're intentional and you're just like a good giving kind of community member, there's an element where you can kind of get this, and not just on Slacks, right? I'm sure in Discords as well, and in this kind of stuff. Like there's a concept of like virtual communities, virtual friends that can be pretty powerful. And I'm seeing that more in like the Web3 kind of crypto world. I think the second, and this is probably more tangible, honestly, like it's probably Twitter. Julia as well was posting on Twitter. I wasn't following her. I didn't know who she was, but Twitter algorithms worked in my favor. Yay. Rally Cap. I wasn't following Hayden or Rally Cap. I didn't know what or who either of these two things were. Again, Twitter algorithm made it on my top of my feed. He tweeted that he was like looking for someone to help out. Same with Julia. Sean Puri did something similar, and I think hired Brandon from Maker's Mark that he needed someone to help with his rolling fund. These are tweets. That's all. That's all it is. You just kind of have to like somewhat follow the right people. Like I said, Hayden and Julia, I wasn't even following them. Right? I didn't know who they were, but I guess I followed enough tech people or enough VCs or enough crypto people that like just made that Twitter algorithm work in my favor. From then on out, it is just showing you are a good person or a relevant, qualified person, right, for the role that they're hiring, and that you are hungry to do this. You have the drive, you have the motivation. How do you stick out? This is like a whole new kind of conversation, but I have like specific methods, and I know you have a rapid fire round. But like one I think is what I like to do is like create websites for these people, actually, like specific websites and buy a domain for these people. Like with Julia, it was like literally like Julia meets Shre, you know. For Ryan Hoover from like Product Fund, I literally bought a domain, Ryan meets Shre. Put it on the email subject line. I can't guarantee this gives you 100% reply rate, but I guarantee you this sticks out in like Julia's inbox. You know, I think another thing with Julia, which she liked, was that I noticed there was a typo on her description, on her job description. I was like, oh, by the way, there's a typo here. You know, like it just shows a bit more, and I guess you're somewhat helping someone, right? Shows that you're really reading through it. It probably shows you're a bit detail orientated, right? And I remember that for her application that I had a pretty busy week. So I was in my mind just thinking I wanted to do it on the weekend. I think she DM'd me on like Thursday or Friday being like, Shre, are you going to apply? Like, I really want to see your application. You know, like after I sent her the type of mistake, right? So you kind of like, these are really small things. They're not hard to do. But I have the belief that if you do like these small things consistently in the long term, it will pay off. I'll pause there, but there's a lot more I can kind of say around like how you can try to stick out and that kind of stuff, because it's definitely helped me, and it's for sure not rocket science.
I've got so much FOMO. Like, I really want to hear what you have to say there, but let's move on to the rapid fire round now. Over to you, Piyush. Thanks, Nadesh. Hey, Shre. So for this rapid fire round, I'm going to ask you some short questions, and you just try to answer them, give a rapid answer to those questions.
Love it. Let's do it.
So first question, how do you motivate yourself when you feel stuck?
Good question. I try to switch up what I'm doing, because I guess I'm working with and for different people, different projects. I just try not to force myself, you know, to really do something. So I'll maybe just like check up on emails real quick, or like maybe do the small thing that I want to do, like admin stuff that I need to do. And I'll just like leave it for that and then come back to it later, you know? Maybe I'll go to the gym, like just to change things up, go for a walk. I find that for the most part, the motivation comes from within, especially right now, because it kind of goes back to what I was saying of like, I only work on stuff that I want to do, that I'm like inherently motivated to do. The times where it's like, there's a bit of a disconnect where you just kind of have to do something, I kind of just think of that bigger goal. Like, why am I doing this? You know, like, who is it for? What does this help me unlock? So I just try to take that longer term view.
Next question. Think back to who you were 5 years ago. What do you think that version of you would be most proud of today?
I think just that I had the balls to like get off the traditional path, as in quitting, starting something, and now like slowly crafting this like freelance career. I'd be very proud of myself back then.
It's the last question. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking of quitting their full-time job?
I think it's a hard question to answer because I think it's very contextual in someone's background, like financial, maybe even their family goals, what their career goals kind of are. I would just say what I wish someone would have told me, which would have been like, generally, you can get another full-time job if you want. Think of the people who you worked with, you know, as long as you had a good relationship, you left a good impression with them, they can be your first kind of safety, kind of like fallback option. You know, as long as you leave well, as long as like you have good relationships, there's that. I think second, this is just from my own experience, but I've had the most deepest like development, personal growth since I've left. So I can only recommend it to anyone to at least try once. You know, you don't have to build a startup, but I just think there's a lot there where you have full ownership of your time. What you realize you naturally gravitate to and want to spend it on. I mean, when you don't have this like fixed, like 9 to 5, I need to be at somewhere and someplace somewhere to do it. I think you get a lot of your awake hours back, and I think it's fascinating what we as people will naturally want to spend that in. So I can only recommend it, but again, yeah, it just depends on your personal circumstances.
This brings us to the end of this round and to the end of the interview. It has been such a pleasure talking to you, Shre.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for taking the time to interview or question me. This was fun. I think it's definitely changed my mind than just like doing these like podcasts, doing these podcast interviews or like whatever. So thank you.